We like to think that forced labor belongs to the past. It doesn't. The International Labour Organization estimates that nearly 28 million people are trapped in forced labor and modern slavery worldwide. Millions of them in state-imposed systems. New evidence suggests that this labor is hidden in the supply chains of the clothes we wear, the tech we rely on, and, as we'll discuss today, the cars we drive. In today's Supply Chain Superintelligence podcast, we start with a single question. What happens when the global automotive industry is built in parts on coercion? I'm very glad to have Markus Löning with me today. He's a leading expert on business and human rights, a former politician, and someone who really knows the practical and political side of this debate. Markus, welcome. I'm very glad you could make it today. There was this report from the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which really steered the pot in the industry, not only in the automotive industry, but in general among brands. And what were your thoughts? What happened when you first read this article?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here in Vienna. And this is a topic that came up a bit more with these articles that were published by Bureau of Investigative Journalism. New York Times reported it, Spiegel reported on it. And it raised awareness that there is forced labor in nearly all of our supply chains. And it made it tangible because it was very well researched. Facts were there, examples were there. So it was, I thought it's great. I thought this is what journalism is about. Good journalism is to uncover these things and to make us aware that there are things in our supply chain that we'd like, to forget, not to look at, ignore a bit. And so I thought it was great seeing that it came to the forefront again and that people reacted to it. And actually we got a lot of reaction also from companies that gave us calls, say, hey, we're in touch with this or that company that was mentioned. What should we do?
It's 2025. How could it be that forced labor is still an issue? And what are the different kinds of forced labor? What is this all about?
Well, usually you think forced labor is something that's far away in countries we hardly know that are poor. That's probably true. There is a lot of forced labor of some sort, especially enforced in these kind of countries. If you think, for example, of the Western African countries, cocoa is from there. And you see kids there that are working in the cocoa fields that are either from very poor farmers' families or, and that's probably worse, that are sent there by their families or where the families are selling their kids to people that traffic them to the cocoa fields from Mali, from Mauritania, and from other countries in the region where you have civil war, where people are really starving or close to starving. Yeah. So that's children in very poor conditions. But then you have modern slavery. There was a scandal in the UK, for example, lately. It was discovered that there were people under slave-like conditions working in factories in Birmingham, I believe.
Really? Okay, yeah.
And so it is also in front of our doors. If you look at the hospitality sector in Europe, if you think about agriculture, and so there are people in slave-like conditions that are not so far away, but they are actually quite close.
You mentioned the UK case. How could we imagine this slave-like conditions? It sounds really like for me it was a surprise now to learn that. Is it the wage, the salary, which is not appropriated? Is it like they're forced, they're taking off the passports? How could we think about that?
Well, there are different sorts of what's considered modern slavery also in our countries. Very often it's trafficking. Yeah. So it's trafficking from Eastern Europe or from the Middle East. And people very often actually have work permits and visa. And the employer doesn't even know he's employing a slave. He's been brought there by a trafficker or by a trafficking organization. They take his passport and they take half, 70%, 80% of his wage. And so they call it hidden in plain sight. They're here, they're there, and we don't even notice it. Not even the employer in these cases very often notices.
We should shine a lot more light on that issue in general. I would like to move on to compliance. Does it help? Is it helpful? Is it a bureaucratic act? What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
On one side, I'm a big fan of the rule of law. So there needs to be rules, they need to be clear, they need to be the same rules for everyone, and they need to be enforced. That's, if you feel treated unfairly, you go to court and then an impartial judge should decide. So that's the rule of law. Basically, or in principle, it's good that we have due diligence laws in place. Yes, they have flaws, as long as they're not risk-based, I think it's not such a good idea. They should be risk-based. But this is what the parliaments have to decide, and companies should look at these laws and take a step back before they go into compliance, talk to their lawyers, and so on. They should say, what's in this that's important for our business? So if we can go along with this law, follow basically what the law is demanding, does that feel right for the business? In what kind of competitive position would it bring us if we do it well? Which parts are important for us, which maybe not so important? So look at it from a business perspective to get an incentive also to say, okay, we're going to put resources into that because it's going to be good for business. It's going to shield us from risks. It's going to shield us from liabilities if we have a due diligence in place that really finds the risks and deals with the risks.
The investigation in one of the reports revealed that state-backed forced labor schemes, especially in Xinjiang, are an issue, and especially also in the automobile industry. What's the picture there? Is it in regards to what goods or components are created by them? Are you aware of that, or is there some parts which are more exposed?
We have had several projects now, also where we work together, where we brought together your capability of finding things, of really doing very deep research into all sorts of sources. So really discovering links between companies, but also indicators that indicate, okay, there are connections to forced labor programs. And what we did is we did the human rights assessment. So how's that risk to be scored in from a human rights perspective, and added the country knowledge, especially also that we have for China. So what is it? What does this finding mean in this context? And the biggest challenge in China is really the lack of transparency. And we could, for example, see that after the publication of this report in New York Times and Spiegel, that some of the sources were deleted from the internet. So Chinese authorities, they're also watching this. But still, you can find things in there. We can still discover things and create, more transparency and create an assessment that will give a client a basis for a judgment. Say, okay, we need to go out. We need to work with this supplier. What do we find? It's, China is huge. It's very diverse. It's 3 times the size of Europe, more or less. It's and from a European perspective, we think, it's one big China. No, it's not. It's super diverse, geographically, socially, historically, language-wise. So traditions are very wide, and also the kind of forced labor we find, or the connections to forced labor we find. We found connections to forced labor programs in Xinjiang, which is the obvious thing. Everyone thinks about that. But then these reports, they were more looking into labor transfer program, where people from Xinjiang province or other provinces were taken sent forcefully to working places. Minorities, mostly, yes. Yeah. I asked a Chinese friend, I said, who are they sending from Xinjiang? Is it always Uyghurs? He said, no, typically they would send people from the largest minority group. So there are Kazakhs, there are Uyghurs, there are other minorities. They would typically send those people away that can potentially create trouble. It is, part of the repression that takes place, because the Chinese government is scared of violence, whatever could happen, or dreams of secession, these kind of things. So what I wanted to say with that is we will find it in China in a variety of industries. Heavy industry is not, it's usually there, but it's also textile, it's other industries. And we recently also discovered forced labor of a different kind, where it was not about people from one of the minorities. It was people that were released from prison.
Okay.
So they, before they left prison, before they were released, they were pushed, coerced into signing contracts with companies that they would work for them.
Was this part of get out of the jail card that you have to sign this, or most likely then?
I would know from my, I don't know in this specific case, but from my understanding and from my knowledge of China and the way they work, and I visited a prison in China, and I've seen how they work and how the pressure on people is. So I would be very surprised if there's no pressure from the authorities. You sign this contract, and then we'll release you, maybe a bit earlier or on time. But you're not free to decide if you're in prison in China.
Two things I want to get a bit more into details, because for me it's always highly interesting. How do you measure risk? Yeah. Like you said, part of your profession is to put a measurement to forced labor risk. How do you do that? What's the thinking that goes into that process?
The basis of all legislation or everything we do regarding human rights risk in business are the UN Guiding Principles for Business and Human Rights. And they give 3 measurements, points, if you want to call them like that. That's scale, it's scope, and remediability. So scale is how severe is it? Are there for example, very severe health issues that are involved, or high exposure to health risks. Scope is how many people are involved in this, or potentially subjected to this risk. And remediability is the question: is it a human rights abuse or a breach of human rights that can be remediated? Like you work too many hours, you don't get paid, things like that. Which okay, you can pay later. And these 3 indicators really say something about the severity of what's happening. So threats to life, for example, that's of course always high. That's also why, for example, child labor, forced labor are always a high risk. Because they are so serious to people, they are irremediable. The physical consequences of forced labor, but also the mental consequences of being forced to work in a dangerous environment, for example. You carry that all your life. It's not something you leave behind easily.
It is not only a reputational issue, or you do not want to be associated with this kind of practices. But it's also often a disruption topic, because, of course, there is no regulation, there is no oversight. That means in areas where they are prone to natural disasters, risk is amplified at the end, because you have these bad conditions there, and then something additional comes on top, like a typhoon or whatever it is, and this exacerbates usually the issues and the consequences there.
Maybe if I may add also to my last thought, there are also other topics that we do assess and that are important for companies. Like if you identify something, there's also a question: how likely is it that it is actually going to happen? So that's also something to be taken into account. And then also, if we assess this, we also look at the quality of the sources, the number of sources. So do we have several people, for example, that independently write on social media or talk about that publicly, this and this is happening? Do we have government documents, for example, that establish a connection to forced labor, which sometimes is the case? Do we have reports by the company? So there are these things like likelihood, and then at the end, of course, also what kind of leverage do I have as a company? That's also something that is taking into account when to prioritize. Where do I start making a difference?
Companies who get caught in such events or in such labor scandals, what is the first three things or the first things they need to do to mitigate the direct impact or to resolve it to a certain extent?
Well, first of all, I would tell them prepare before it happens. Yeah. So have a risk or a crisis simulation in place before a crisis handbook, however you would call it. We've been doing a couple of crisis simulations lately with companies, and most companies are actually not well prepared. They don't think about these human rights issues. They're well prepared if there's a fire or other things they can relate to better. But this kind of crisis, for example, usually triggers media attention, and they're not prepared. They don't know what to say. The communication, internal communication, the external communication is not clear. It's not clear who's responsible, and all of these. So that's the best recommendation I can give is be prepared before. Be clear. How are we going to communicate? Who decides what we say? And if you find this, for example, I think it is important. You have an allegation somewhere, find out about the facts. Talk to the persons that are at the origin, so the journalists that wrote about it, the NGO that wrote about it. Call them and tell them, listen, I need to know everything you know so that I can go after that and really have a serious look at this. So check the facts and then work with people that understand the situation there to move away from there and see, do we have leverage to change the actual situation with our supplier, which is sometimes possible. Also we've had cases with suppliers also in China where you always think, well, there's nothing to it. No, it's not true. Sometimes you can change things. But also sometimes you have to simply realize you cannot change it. And that is a very dire situation, especially if it is an important supplier, someone you depend on or partially depend on. So make a plan first and then act on the plan.
I can imagine that's a really tough spot to be in if you discover something, but it's the only source you get. It's like
the worst thing you can do is deny.
Yeah, okay.
So if it comes up, you say no, impossible. So the best thing to do is we're taking this seriously, we're looking into it, and we'll get back to you as soon as we know more. So don't go public with this kind of, we're clean, we know our suppliers, we trust them. And so, it's all true. Maybe you did your best, but maybe that wasn't good enough.
So I've worked in crisis management and in the past, and that's one of the key issues usually. So transparency is important. If you lie, you will get caught along the way. It's not worth trying it at all. And as you said, it's usually also in my experience, it's a communication crisis. At this part, there's a tragedy behind that, and this has to be acknowledged. But for the company itself, it's something which need to be dealt with on a communication, on a holding level usually, and there they need all the plans you just outlined very, very detailed, because otherwise it's communication nightmare.
Absolutely, and that creates the real problem then. So you have the problem on the ground with the bad human rights situation, plus on top you have a crisis in your company because media are calling you, your investors are calling you, your employees are asking questions, and the clients also asking questions, and that really creates so much pressure that it's very hard to take good decisions.
Usually, if you're not prepared, the decisions are not getting better. Definitely, and shareholders, because we discussed it before, are not happy with that then either. And maybe that's a way. I'm not sure. Just wanted to ask your opinion on that. Maybe that's a way to communicate the importance of being prepared, to show what it could cost when a crisis hits you and you're not prepared.
We had this a couple of months, was it last year? I don't know. There was a allegation against a large French sportswear company, and so I talked with Harald and with your other colleagues, and we actually found out that they could have known 9 years ago. If they would have asked us, if they would have asked Freeway for Löning, we would have found out 9 years ago. They could have dealt with the problem without media attention, without all the the public pressure and could have solved the problem.
The French company you mentioned, which can you call a name on that?
I can, because it was in the New York Times, I believe. So it was Decathlon. So it was a very big name. I don't want to point my finger at them. Others had other issues. Also, most of the sports brands had issues with human rights of different kinds. So, it's the industry. Yeah. But I wanted to make the point that, look early, find early, solve the problem.
We're now moving on to the hot takes. So it's basically 5 questions I'm going to ask you. And the idea is that you just say yes or no. Whatever comes to mind. The first one is forced labor is unavoidable in global supply chains.
It's not unavoidable, but we should spot it and then stop it.
NGOs and journalists do more to uncover forced labor than governments and corporations?
Well, that's true in many countries, but not in all countries. I mean, I must say there are also countries where you have good law enforcement and where the police will go after slaves or trafficked persons and these kind of things. But in general, it's not wrong. Companies should step up their effort.
Technology, like AI or monitoring tools, will solve the forced labor problem.
They're a super important tool. And they're important part of the solution. Because there are things that, a couple of years you wouldn't have thought. How do you discover slavery in fishery? It's a huge problem in Southeast Asia. It's very easy if you look at satellite data and if you look at the location data of the ships. Because typically a ship with slaves on it will not go to a port very often. It will unload the catch to another ship somewhere in the middle of the ocean and then go on in its trip. It's just one example. There's many more where technology has made such great progress over the last years. Also because there was investment. They're great. They are very innovative people that develop the tech, and there are investors that say this is important and we believe that we should know more.
And I think here regulations played an important role.
Absolutely.
Because they drove the investments, I'm quite sure. Question number 4. Consumers actually don't care if their products are made with forced labor.
I once talked to this guy who was a retailer, and he said, usually they come into the door and they're human rights heroes when they enter the shop. And the closer they get to the shelves, the cheaper they get. Yeah. And then at the end of the day, of course, the price, the color, the material is also very important. But I think that the general importance of the topic in discussions, if I talk to consumers, has changed.
Yeah. And I think it ties in what you mentioned before, if your product is more of a commodity, there are differentiators like is it a forced labor free product or not, which getting more important. If it's something like a lifestyle product, not sure people really want to have and crave for, it's much harder.
But it's actually also another example of how important business is. So if you are in B2B business, like you have a commodity, mining, whatever, something, and if the automotive companies say we can only buy it if it was made under good conditions, that makes a difference. Yeah. It's not the consumer in that case, but it is a large company that says we want to behave as responsible as possible. Yeah. So, it's not just the consumers.
Since you brought it up, the mixing of inputs, when you said, okay, is it feasible for companies to do that for every product? If there are mixed components of products, you think that's still doable?
I think that you need to take a common sense approach. Yeah. And it should be risk-based. Yeah. So you look at what is our highest purchasing category, for example, the highest risk purchasing category. Let's start looking into that. Let's try to make a difference there and take the lessons we learned in managing this to the other commodities or the other products that we're actually buying. So do it step by step so that it doesn't kill you as a company, but that you put resources into this that are reasonable, that make a difference, and don't feel bullied or pushed. Act in a sensible way, in a reasonable way, but act.
Yeah, I think that's a highly actionable and important recommendation, because I can imagine it's overwhelming for companies to think, okay, I have to solve everything now, and in that way you cut it off, cut it in parts, and start wherever it makes most sense, and maybe it's easy.
When Lieferkettengesetz was new, we got questions like, "Well, we always buy flowers at the shop around the corner for the boss. So do we have to check the flower shop now?" And I thought, "Hey guys, you're middle-aged people. You had a university education. I mean, you use your brains in other circumstances as well. Just think a bit, They were so panicked in that moment, and it has become better.
Yeah.
That's also why I like the break in the legislation at the moment. Take a step back.
People
relax,
can
focus.
Reevaluate their first thoughts, their immediate thoughts, and come back to it. Fifth question. Audits are useless in detecting forced labor.
No, they're not useless. They're like technology. They are another building block. They have limitations in the methodology, and they have limitations in in certain contexts, of course. But they can provide you with information, and every bit of information will help. No. But if you say that's the only thing we're doing, that's not good enough. No. It's a building block.
Coming to the last part, the view from Europe. There are a lot of regulations upcoming or already in place, and with the omnibus thing, it's getting a bit relaxed now. And in some cases, what are the most important regulations, the European regulations in regards to forced labor?
Well, I think the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, the U.S. Law, does make a large difference. The Americans typically or the U.S. Americans are taking a different approach. They always say, it's all about the outcome. Mm-hmm. I don't care what you do before. We just want a certain outcome. If you produce something and forced labor is in it, you're not entering the market. How you do that before? And
it's really detained, the container is detained in the ports. Exactly. In the worst case.
It's in Los Angeles, it's stored, you cannot access it, bring it to the market. Europeans typically take a different approach. They say, okay, you need due diligence, you need to lower your risk by having processes in place that address that. That's more complicated. It's sometibe in the long run, I don't know which of these approaches will be more.
That would have been my next question.
I don't know. But I think it will certainly have an effect. I had a conversation with entrepreneurs from Sri Lanka just 2 weeks ago, and then
the geopolitical post you did on LinkedIn, I think, or is it? Yeah, I read it.
Yeah. It was about they were asking questions. So what does it mean for us? And I think that's also what we need to look at. It does make a difference because we are a large market, which still is attractive for a lot of exporters. So they are interested in meeting our regulation. We should help them with that. Yeah. I think there should also be more than just the regulation. There should be also conversations with the governments explaining what does that mean for trade. How can we support trade and investment and still make sure that human rights standards are met. It's usually in a country like Sri Lanka, it's just Sri Lankan labor law. It's nothing that we put over them. It's if they comply with their labor law, no problem.
The interesting part for me here is because usually we only heard the bad stuff about geopolitics and the current situation, but there is no downside without upside for other countries. And if you mention now that maybe there could be a shift to reshore to Sri Lanka or wherever, that's actually a chance also, I guess, for the companies to put the regulations and their requirements in place from the beginning, to not being only second always.
Absolutely. I mean, you just signed an agreement with Indonesia, for example. That's really important because it's a country with 200 million people. They're rich in resources. They have palm oil, but they also have a lot of other things. They have a fairly educated population, so there's also value creation that takes place inside Indonesia. It's not just raw materials. So it's very interesting. It's an interesting market. It's an interesting procurement market, and companies that are moving in there can now, from the beginning, say, okay, these are rules that we want to comply with. And I think it's a good chance of doing that.
Totally agree. If you design something from the beginning, it's usually much more doable than putting it on after the fact. So that's actually a big chance for us and for the other countries. I totally agree. We are at the end. Anything else you want to mention we haven't touched on, and you think that's highly important to still get it out?
No, I think you touched on many very very good points. I think if you ask me what's going to happen next, I think companies should be aware that transparency of supply chain will increase hugely over the next years due to technology, actually, because it's constantly improving, and the thinkers behind the technology also are very smart people that develop things in a good way. So hiding behind, well, actually, I don't know, they're not telling me, and so on, is, you can still do it now, next year, the year after, it's gone, because so much more can be found already. So transparency, I believe, will become a lot better. It's something where you, especially, Priya, you made great efforts, and you can create a lot of transparency already now, which then again helps our work. We can tell our clients, okay, this is where you have a problem. It's down that road that you need. So companies should step back, think about the future, what's important for them, not think about regulation, but think that clean business, good business, ethical business is the best business and will pay off at the end.
Yeah. That's it for today's episode of Supply Chain Superintelligence. A big thank you to you, Markus, for sharing these insights. I've learned a lot. I think the listeners have learned a lot as well. And thanks for your time, and hopefully we can repeat that soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thanks for organizing, and setting this up and broadcasting this. That's great.